Hello and good evening. My name is Madeline Hennigan. I am the co-director of Writing on the Wall, and I'm here this evening to welcome you to Black History Month at WoW, which is part of a wider Liverpool Black History Month festival, where a host of arts organisations from the creative organisations of Liverpool, which is also known as Cool, have put together a dynamic, incredible programme, and all of the details on that for that programme can be found on Culture Liverpool's website. And I'd just like to take this opportunity on behalf of WoW and Cool to thank the Mayor's City Fund and Culture Liverpool for their support in enabling this festival to go ahead this month, and also to thank Arts Council England for their continued support. Here at WoW, we've had 3 weeks of incredible Black writers, artists and commentators from across the globe and from our local community too. People like prize-winning, Booker Prize winner Marlon James, the Crip Hop stars featured in the new Netflix documentary Phoenix Rising, Sharmi Chakrabarti, and Liverpool's own Patrick Graham. And throughout the month, we've been showcasing the work of our new writers from our project called Time to Breathe, specifically for Black and Asian writers. And we've been showcasing their work throughout October, and we'll continue to do it to the end, with small films which are available on Facebook. So make sure you catch them. And there's so much more to come. Storytime events for our very young audiences. Majid, the Mayor of Sheffield, is going to be teaching us, former Mayor of Sheffield, the art of disruption. Sophia Williams will be talking on how to be an ally. Our friends from the Goddess Project are back this year, and we will be launching at the end of the month a new Windrush-inspired book on the UK music scene, and with special guest Michael Riley, who is a founder member of Steel Pulse. So a lot of incredibly exciting events to come, and you can find details of all of those on our website, wowfest.uk. But this, and I'll just remind you that you can, as well as catching all of these events that are still on Facebook, you can tonight join in the conversation and the discussion using the comments facility on Facebook. So this evening, in what is titled Public Health Crises Then and Now, we're going to be digging deep into the topic of colonialisation, but also bringing it right up to date and looking at the historic reasons and contemporary reasons why Black and some racial minority communities are up to 4 times more likely to be affected by COVID than white communities. And for this unique keynote address, I'm delighted to welcome Stephen Small, all the way from Berkeley, California. And I'm particularly delighted to welcome Stephen home, so to speak, as Stephen was born and raised in Liverpool. He studied at the University of Bristol at Canterbury, and he's now the Professor of African Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He's worked in Brazil, in Jamaica, and across Western Europe. His most recent book is 20 Questions and Answers on Black Europe, and he's currently researching the legacies of imperialism upon Black Europe. So I'm absolutely delighted, and join with me in giving a virtual welcome to Stephen Small at WowFest. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, Madeline. Thanks for that fantastic introduction. I appreciate it very much. It's good to be back home, so to speak.
We're absolutely delighted to have you here. So welcome to Writing on the Wall. This is your first time, so particularly warm welcome. But now I'm going to over to you, and I'll be back with some questions and conversations shortly.
I look forward to it. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's my first event at WoW, and I hope to do a good job. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My sincere thanks to Madeline Hennigan, co-director of WoW, and to Kieran Hodges and the entire WoW team for making today's presentation possible. I know WoW has organized an impressive array of Black History Month activities, and I've deeply appreciated many of the ones I've been able to watch. I know that people around Liverpool have watched them, people around Britain, and also internationally. So thanks also to them and to everyone who has joined us for tonight's presentation. Due to the impact of COVID and the video lecture that we need to do these days, I'm going to keep today's talk to around 25 minutes. I want to let you know I'm preparing a longer written paper, which I'll share with everybody in the next few weeks. Okay, next slide, please. Go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. So tonight's talk on Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine is not just an end in itself, but also a means to an end. As an end in itself, I will tell you about the school, who, what, when, where, and why it all got going. But this talk is really a means to an end, a chance to raise some far more important questions about imperialism and its legacies, and about the Black voices of resistance and resilience during imperialism. Next slide, please. And by Black voices, I mean African and Black intellectuals, academics, philosophers, activists, especially Black women. The truth is, I wasn't interested in the tropical school at all at the beginning, and I actually stumbled on them by accident. But now I've become fascinated with the school, and I'm doing research to find out a lot more. Originally, I was reading work about anti-imperialist Pan-Africanists, and it was that reading, like the people on this screen, that led me to Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. I was reading because I wanted to know the who, what, when, where, and why of Pan-Africanism. I was reading the works by some of the people you see here on the screen, people like Ellen Craft, Sarah Parker Remond, Anna Julia Cooper, Amy Jakes Garvey, Anna Jones, Constance Cumming-John, Claudia Jones, and Audrey Lloyd. And you know, you have to search a lot harder to find the voices of Black women compared to Black men, because, as Patricia Hill Collins reminds us, Black women's position was subjugated and their knowledge was subordinated. So we have to dig deep. Next slide, please. But I was making progress looking at these Black voices, looking for them. And I came across a statement by one of the most important, foremost Pan-Africanists of the imperial age, Edward Wilmot Blyden. Blyden was born in the West Indies. He spent all of his life promoting West Africa for African Americans. He believed that Africa offered Black people an escape from the ravages of slavery and imperialism, and an escape from white supremacy. He believed that Africa offered a vast continent of opportunity. And he said this was possible because white people could not survive the climate or the fatal diseases that could be found in Africa, especially tropical Africa and West Africa. As far as Blyden was concerned, West Africa was the white man's grave, but the Black man's salvation. And when I read these statements, it got me thinking about sanitation and disease, health and hygiene, medical prevention, treatment and cure. And this was especially prominent in my mind because while I was reading, the COVID-19 crisis was going on. And also because I found out that Blyden himself actually spent several weeks in Liverpool's Southern Hospital at the turn of the 20th century. Now, Blyden wasn't the only one encouraging Black people to go back to Africa. Marcus Garvey was the most popular, and his motto was Africa for the Africans, a home and abroad. Next slide, please. Now, I knew about the Back to Africa movement already a long time before I even looked at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, a long time before I even heard the words of Pan-Africanism. Why? Because reggae music and Rastafari came to England in the 1970s when I was a teenager. Black people in England back then, especially in Liverpool, we were talking about going back to Africa. I remember singing in the reggae song, Daydreaming of Africa, and another reggae song, Going Back to Africa Because I'm Black. I also remember Mutabaruka's critique of British racism and assimilation in his song, White Man's Country. His argument was, don't stay in a white man's country too long. Racism, brutality, and hostility will beat you down and you will lose your Black culture. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, and I didn't have the right language, but reggae and Rastafari were already putting me on the track to decolonizing in my mind. So it's this reading that brought me to the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. That school opened in the 1890s during the so-called Scramble for Africa, when European nations during that so-called scramble sat down like gentlemen and shared out 90% or more of the African continent among themselves. After losing America and abolishing Caribbean slavery, Great Britain saw Africa as an alternative source of economic profit and political power, and as a way to prevent France and Germany from beating them to the goalpost. By 1914, Great Britain controlled more land and people in Africa than any other European nation. Next slide, please. Of course, the Brits couldn't just walk into Africa like a stroll in Regent's Park. Africans resisted, they fought, and they won battles. Ethiopians defeated Italians at the Battle of Adwa. Ashantis in the Gold Coast fought 5 wars against the British between the 1820s and 1900. There were battles involving the British in Egypt, East Africa, and South Africa too. But by the 1890s, the Brits had the Gatling gun and the Maxim gun, basically machine guns, guns that unleashed 200 rounds per minute, slaughtering everyone and everything in sight. So the Brits mainly won. Next slide, please. Resistance by African women and men wasn't the only obstacle to European domination. Disease often took a bigger toll. And West Africa apparently had the highest incidence of tropical diseases across the world. These diseases caused immense rates of mortality amongst British personnel, which is why it was nicknamed the White Man's Grave. As I say, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine opened in 1898. The goal was to develop medical knowledge to treat, cure, and prevent tropical diseases, especially in British colonies where there were primary British economic and political interests, like West Africa. And West Africa, by the way, was the part of the world that most interested Liverpool traders, companies, businesses, and politicians, for obvious reasons, given the spectacular economic gains and profits that these people had made during transatlantic slavery. Next slide, please. The impetus to develop research on tropical medicine came from the British government, initiated by the Colonial Office, led at that time by Joseph Chamberlain. In the Colonial Office, he was an ardent imperialist. He believed in the goodness and greatness of the British Empire, and he worked hard to consolidate and expand the empire with the possible maximum benefit for Great Britain. Now, Chamberlain quickly appreciated the indispensability of medical science's role in keeping British men alive and advancing British interests. He pushed for the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and he also pushed for the London School of Tropical Medicine. He didn't hesitate to put his money where his mouth was, and he persuaded other men to do the same. One of these men was Sir Alfred Lewis Jones. And Alfred Lewis Jones put the lion's share, as they say, of money to establish the School of Tropical Medicine. Next slide, please. Now, Chamberlain made sure that the school in Liverpool got the best of everything. He made sure that it got extensive political support. He made sure it got substantial funding from government and private industry. He made sure the best minds and men were recruited for the school, highly educated, intelligent, brilliant analysts, full of initiative and drive, tireless in their quest for discovery and results. And Chamberlain made sure that they undertook the most beneficial expeditions, with multiple expeditions going from Liverpool to the west coast of Africa in the 1890s and later. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, let me see. I think we've got this slide. Yeah, okay. So just one moment. The men recruited to the school made excellent progress, and they had outstanding achievements, incredible discoveries, the most advantageous solutions to these medical issues, and the highest international awards, including several Nobel Prizes. They expanded the use of quinine as a prophylactic. They expanded the use of mosquito nets for protection. They promoted healthy daily regimes and preventative measures, a wide array of protocols, including widespread racial segregation. Did I say racial segregation? Yes, widespread racial segregation. And I'll get back to that in a moment. In this way, and with these measures, they significantly reduced British mortality and turned the white man's grave into the white man's garden. And as you can see here, Chamberlain made sure that the school got an impressive building. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, I can tell you that I knew about this building a long time before I ever read about it in a book. I used to pass it every day, that building, on the number 25 bus from Egbert Vale to Shaw Street in Everton, on my way to school in Everton. The Tropical School building was right there on Pembroke Place, and it's still there, I think. I didn't know at the time that it was an imperial building. I didn't even think about it. I passed other buildings from the same period on Princess Avenue, and other buildings like the Rackets Club on Upper Parliament Street. And I passed a load of statues too, like Huskisson. I don't think I even noticed them or thought about them or considered what they meant. And I don't think I even cared. Not at that time anyway. I had other things to worry about. Next slide, please. Alfred Jones played a crucial role in the School of Tropical Medicine and all its endeavors. He was born in Wales in 1845, but when he was very young, his family moved to Liverpool, and he grew up in Liverpool till he was a teenager. He began working on ships that went to West Africa at the age of 14, and he rapidly rose in the shipping hierarchy, first on the ships, then in the offices that managed the ships, then as a manager, proprietor, facilitator, and benefactor in Liverpool, England, West Africa, and the West Indies. He was a worker, a partner, a manager, or an owner, and a competitor too, with the Laird brothers, Elder Dempster and Company, and with John Holt. And as you can see from here, he was into a wide array of goods. He was into boats and ships, sail and steam, on rivers, seas, and oceans. He was into railways, roads and harbors, banks and hotels, insurance and assurance. He was into palm oil, palm kernels, cocoa, gum, and cotton from West Africa, salt, soap, candles, and cloth to West Africa. And he was into oil and coal going both ways. And just for fun, I imagine, he was into bananas from the West Indies. If I can mix my metaphors and use the vernacular, Jones was a very busy bee, and he had his fingers in many pies. Next slide, please. Now, the story told about Jones is a story of rags to riches. Oh, next slide, please. The story told about Jones is a story of rags to riches, from cabin boy to millionaire. And once he became a millionaire, or before that, he was keen to spread his wealth on good deeds. He donated to multiple projects in Liverpool, including cathedrals and hospitals, education, training, and the university. Everything apparently except local politics, which he seemed to avoid. It was almost a natural step for him to turn to medicine. And he quickly donated to the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, with some of the results I've just described. By the way, he lived in a house in Egbert called Oaklands, and I'm curious to learn more about that house. Despite his generosity, Jones was not blessed with a long life, and he died suddenly, aged 65. His funeral was held at Mossley Hill Church. Okay. Now I think we're okay. Yeah, let's stick with that photo. Now, his contemporaries wrote about him with admiration and reverence, And some of them, all white men, called him the uncrowned king of Africa. He had worked closely with the Colonial Office during all this time. The British government recognized and honored him with a knighthood in 1901. Liverpool City honored him too, and there is, it seems, a statue at the pier head. This painting in the Walker Art Gallery still exists, I assume, and there was a memorial hospital named after Jones in Garston, but that hospital was shut down in the early 2000s. So there you have it, two great men, Chamberlain and Jones, working in the interest of the British Empire for the common good of all its imperial subjects, white, black, and other. Saving lives, healing the sick, building roads and railways, expanding shipping and trade, spreading Christianity, British governments and philanthropists doing what Great Britain does best, saving the world for peace, prosperity, and happiness. At least that's what they tell us. But as usual, there's more to this story than meets the eye. There's another side to the story, and it's what reggae group Bearing Spear asks: what about the half that has never been told? And today, as I continue, I'd like to suggest that the half that has never been told is a story of unfettered self-interest, unrestrained national self-interest, imperial domination, economic exploitation, and white supremacy, if I can put it bluntly. Next slide, please. Given the constraints of time and Zoom lectures, I'll just make several points about the half that has never been told. Point number one, Jones wasn't entirely the angel that he's being painted. He wanted a significant return on his financial investments, which I suppose is not unreasonable. He said, and I quote, "Money spent on the School of Tropical Medicine is an investment, and we expect dividends from it." To get those dividends and more, he often engaged in brutal monopolistic competition with shipping companies and rivals. He worked hand in hand, supporting the horrific activities of King Leopold of Belgium in the Congo, providing Leopold with business, shipping services, and access to the School of Tropical Medicine for information and medical training. Point number two, yes, the tropical school saved lives, but to paraphrase George Orwell, all lives are equal, but some lives are more equal than others. And all the evidence I've found indicates that white lives in Africa were far more valuable than African lives in Africa. Government and other resources were targeted as a matter of policy and practice to saving white sailors and military personnel, to saving white colonial administrators and missionaries. And they saved far more of those lives than they did African lives. Point number three, until they could really control the diseases that British government was concerned with, the British government decided that the best policy was to keep whites and Africans strictly apart. So the British government introduced and enforced racial segregation, especially in living spaces in West Africa. Fences, barriers, and bars were all put in place. Whites and Africans were kept strictly apart. Now, this wasn't called Jim Crow, and it wasn't called apartheid, but it was intentional, deliberate, government-sponsored, designed to protect the health and well-being, the lives and the livelihoods of white people rather than Africans. Point number four, other kinds of institutional racism also happened every day. On the ships, it was low pay, the worst jobs, and absolutely no jobs for Africans supervising white people. While on land, it was subordinated roles, inferior facilities, and low pay. Fully qualified doctors, fully qualified African doctors, some of whom had been educated in England, were legally barred by the British government from working in the African medical service in Africa, plain and simple. Point number five, death in Africa didn't only happen from diseases that were present there. There were plenty of diseases in Great Britain itself, and plenty more diseases in the colonies that the British controlled. thousands of British soldiers, sailors, administrators, and missionaries brought plenty of those diseases with them to Africa, killing tens of thousands of Africans and causing epidemics amongst Africans in several places. Now, there were other inequities in Africa too, but time doesn't allow. Next slide, please. Let me say one more thing. Racial discrimination in West Africa, across the British Empire, and in Liverpool too, was justified by racist ideologies. Ideologies created, refined, and articulated by elite men in science and education, and disseminated by elite men in politics and business, like some of the names you see here. And by the end of the 19th century, social Darwinism and eventually eugenics had taken over as the dominant ideologies from the biological racism that had ruled their minds during slavery. Now, we know these ideologies today because many of their catchwords have filtered down to us: evolution, natural selection, survival of the fittest, nature versus nurture, birth control, sterilization, and restricted immigration. Again, as you see it on this slide. And we know this especially in Liverpool, a city with a long history preoccupied with maintaining racial purity, preoccupied with pathologizing so-called half-caste, preoccupied with the stigmatization of white women married to black men, and of course, the infamous Fletcher and Fleming reports. During all this time, by the way, you'll have noticed it's men, 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 invading, conquering, winning battles, creating wealth, trade, and prosperity. Men, 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 finding diseases, treatments, and cures. Were there no women? Yes, there was a handful, here and there, including some women in professional medicine, probably all white and probably all elite. These were the exceptions to the rule. Why were there so few? It's easy to answer. Rich white women at that time were in the household supervising staff or at university. Some of them were out campaigning for the vote, which they didn't get until 1918, and only apparently if they were 30 years old. Poor white women, including Irish Catholics, were in the factory or workplace. And of course, cooking, cleaning, and washing in rich people's homes and in their homes too. This was institutional sexism. I did an interview a few weeks ago, about racism, decolonizing the mind, statues, and the coronavirus. And the guy who interviewed me asked me, when you were growing up in Liverpool, were you concerned about statues? What? Statues? I said, I didn't have time to be worried about statues. I was too busy dealing with racist abuse, racial violence, and staying alive. I went to a school in Everton with 1,000 white boys, and there were only 4 black boys, including me. That's what I was worried about. Diseases, I said, I had no time to worry about diseases. The main thing I was worried about was my mental health, because several of my friends in Liverpool 8 had serious mental health problems, some of them from racism. And as far as decolonizing the mind, when I was a teenager, I didn't know or hear that phrase or use it for another 40 years. But at the same time, when I was a teenager, I know I was actually in the process of decolonizing my mind, even though I didn't have the phrase. I knew that from Bob Marley, who told me, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but yourself can free your mind. And I wasn't the only one listening to Bob Marley at that time then. And I bet that there's a lot of people in the audience who did that too. Next slide, please. So there you have it. Liverpool and Lagos, illness and disease, medicine and health, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and the London School of Tropical Medicine too, power and resources, and the British Empire. But you also have anti-imperialist African women and men fighting for survival, fighting for African liberation and independence in the midst of these crises. A complicated story. So what's the point of it all? Again, in the interest of time, let me keep this brief. First, I've given you a taste of the who, what, when, or why. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. Excuse me, the technology. Okay. First, I've given you a taste of the who, what, when, where, and why of the Liverpool School. I know a lot more about that school, and you can find out a lot more too. But obviously, here is not the time or the place. Secondly, remember I was led to the school by African and Black women and men fighting British imperialism. And it's important that we find out more about these women and men. Tonight, I told you about the existence of tens of thousands of documents, speeches, letters, memos, reports, articles, and books, many of them available online that we can benefit from if we want a more complete story and the bigger picture. Third, I've highlighted once again British imperialism as a direct legacy of slavery. British imperialism, which needs to be interrogated along slavery, domination and the exploitation of African people in Africa and in the diaspora did not end with the British legal abolition of slavery. Remember, British slavery made the village of Liverpool a town. British imperialism made the town a city. Fourth, and I haven't had time to say anything much about the public health crisis today or coronavirus, but let me say a few things. Clearly, there are obvious differences between the past and present, but less obvious are the underlying patterns of racial inequality and racism. And some of them are less obvious because the powers that be refuse to engage with them. However, in terms of power, authority, and resources, race is there. In terms of who suffers and succumbs the most, race is there. In terms of access to treatment, race is there. In terms of who is low paid and vulnerable and who is high paid and protected, race is there. And I know that these are issues that many Black organizations and individuals are demanding attention about right now. Fifth, in terms of knowledge production, it should be clear that my argument is the full story about Sir Alfred Lewis Jones and the School of Tropical Medicine hasn't been fully told. The full story about Liverpool and West Africa hasn't been fully told either. They haven't been fully researched or fully written. And it's not just them. We still don't know the full story about British imperial institutions like businesses, housing and neighborhood, and environment. And we don't know the full story about universities. But as some of you know, research is currently being done, and so the full stories are beginning to emerge. Next slide, please. Before I end, I want everyone present to know that when I was in Liverpool schools, I wasn't told a single thing about any of this information. Nothing about African resistance, nothing about African women and men fighting for freedom, nothing about African intellectuals, academics, professionals, or activists, nothing about the Black organizations set up in Liverpool in England to fight against institutional racism, nothing about the tens of thousands of documents and massive amounts of evidence available, nothing about legal racial discrimination in West Africa, or about de facto racial segregation in Liverpool itself. Everything I've told you today, I found out about outside the British education system, after being put on the path to decolonizing my mind by family and community, by advice, information, and recommendations from South Liverpool personnel, Elamu Wanane, and the Charles Wotton Centre. And that's a fact. As I said at the start of this presentation, this story of the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine was more a means to an end rather than an end in itself. To tell a more accurate, more comprehensive, and more inclusive story about British imperialism, and to convey and highlight the Black voices that are necessary and indispensable for a more complete picture of the school, of the city, and of that period. And in this way, as a means to an end, I like to believe that the end justifies the means, if you get my meaning. Thank you. Next slide. And I'm finished.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk, and in particular for kind of widening out my view. I hadn't really thought of anything about the Tropical School of Medicine until we started having conversations. I mean, to me, it's just somewhere where you go and get your injections if you're going on a long haul holiday. But actually, it is so relevant to some of the work I've been doing at Writing on the Wall. So as I've been preparing and reading little bits, to find out that it was funded by the shipping magnates, Alfred Lewis Jones, John Holt, it was like, wow, makes total sense. And actually the work that we've been doing on breakwater race riots, you know, these were the ships that the guys that were involved in those race riots were being brought over on, and as you say, in segregated conditions, on worse pay. And so it is, you know, that has allowed me to join quite a few dots. So thanks, thanks for that, Stephen. And I've actually got I've got a point from Tony Bailey actually that says, great stuff, Stephen. My great grandfather died of malaria on one of Alfred Jones's ships to West Africa in 1887. The crews were mixed then, which backs up your thesis. Read the LSTM, many thanks. But when you look on the website of the School of Tropical Medicine, and actually when you look at London's website, these people are just described as philanthropists, really, aren't they? There's no recognition. You know, I think the motto is breaking the cycle of poor health and poverty since 1898. And as it wasn't the poverty of those people in the colonies or the poor health. So do you think it is time for institutions like both schools of tropical actually to start to own that past? How do you think that could happen?
Well, thanks, Madeline, for those comments. It's long since the time that they should own that past. And the goal, as I articulate it, is the story we currently have is a terribly one-sided story. And we need a complete story and a full story that shows everything wasn't so good and great for people in the British Empire. Now, we know there's class stratification within the white population in England and stratification elsewhere. And what I'm arguing and what I would like to see the schools do is move away from this great white man history of Britain, great white man history of the schools, great white man philanthropists. They had good intentions and they had good achievements. But other people like Aimé Césaire, he says, don't tell me about all the roads you built. Don't tell me about all the railways you built. Don't tell me about all the hospitals you built. You also destroyed civilizations. You murdered and massacred people. Okay, so I'm not saying this to just show them or to embarrass them. I'm saying if education is going to be accurate, comprehensive, and inclusive, they need to address that. Now, as you know, I didn't get a chance to talk about the sailors on the ships, okay, African sailors and white British sailors, and they were all exploited, white, English, and Irish. We know that. However, what tended to happen is white men would go on the ships to West Africa and they would die on the way, or they would die while they were there. And then African men were recruited because the ship did not want to go back with a half crew. But these African men, initially, if you read Ray Costello and Tony Lane, initially it seems they got relatively equal pay, but very quickly they were given far less pay, far worse jobs, and far worse conditions. So I think it's horrendous that we have an educational system that basically lies and deceives. So how can they move forward? Well, they should engage. I have a simple position. You should engage with Black voices. I mean, there were thousands of people writing, documenting, campaigning. And as I said, I never heard any of this in schools. I began to get some of it at university in England, but none of this was in the schools. Nobody told me about John Archer as the first or second Black mayor of a city in England. No one told me that John Archer was at the Pan-African Congress in 1900 in London. Nobody mentioned the Pan-African Congress. Nobody told me that Samuel Coleridge Taylor played the music at the Pan-African Congress. Nobody told me that Anna Julia Cooper and these other African-American women were at the Congress. Why? Because the way British racism works, it's not like Americans frequently. British racism works by avoidance, evasion, silence. Let's not look at this. Euphemisms. Let's not deal with these issues. And basically, it's highly deficient education, and it's a disservice to us. So I'd like to see these schools starting to do research, starting to recruit qualified people to do research. And when I say qualified people, not just people like me with PhDs, there's a lot of people in the community in Liverpool, in Leicester, in Leeds, in Nottingham, who have been writing these kinds of histories for a long time, but have been kept out of universities. So it's relatively straightforward. A lot of this stuff is being written. It's just not being engaged with.
And I've actually got a comment coming through that says LSTM, this is from Sam, who works there, has embarked on a project to critically review our history and confront our own past. This is fascinating, and we want to engage and address this.
Good.
So, yeah.
But remember,
go on.
Sorry, Madeline, go ahead.
No, go on.
Good. However, remember, Chamberlain put his money where his mouth was. And I hear a lot of people talking about decolonizing the mind. It's just a slogan. Let's look at the substance rather than the slogan. So I welcome, I applaud, I commend any of these institutions that say they're going to do it. I just want to see the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Are they going to put forward the resources? Now, I know what they'll say. I know what they'll say because we've seen it all before. They'll say, we'd love to do it. We really want to do it. It's very important. Unfortunately, we don't have resources. But they've been singing the same song. And I understand resources are limited, but resources are always limited. And they've been singing the same song. And it's giving us earache. How about that? This same song is giving us earache. Yeah, I like that.
I mean, you know, to be fair to the school, they're not the only culprits in town. You know, you talked about the report, and the Liverpool University has got the Roxby building. Again, somebody who's just described as a philanthropist and a liberal, but who actually really supported the Fletcher report and wrote the foreword to it. And was part of that kind of demonization of so-called half-caste people of Liverpool. Mm-hmm. Okay,
let me just respond to that. Yeah, I understand they're not the only culprits. And I said that at the end of the presentation, that there's a lot of institutions we still need the full story. And I understand that many of them are not intentionally racist. I understand that many of them may not be intentionally sexist. Okay. I also understand that people my age, I'm in my 60s, all of us, white and black and non-black, we had a colonized education. Many people were not told about these kinds of things, and we're watching black and white minstrels on the TV, reading Sparky comics, Tarzan movies, Zulu movies. So a lot of white people are also victims of colonized education. And I don't want them to fall their knees and beg for forgiveness. All I want to hear is, how do we go forward? And I want to make it clear, I'm here to build, not destroy. I'm here to make education more accurate, more comprehensive, more inclusive, not to turn it down. And I work with anyone. Some of my best friends are white. Can I say that? That's what they told me in Liverpool all the time. Some of my best friends are black. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so thinking about not just the schools of tropical medicine, but the discipline of tropical medicine. Do you think its colonial roots, if you like, are still evident in how it operates today across the world?
Look, the short answer is I don't know for sure about that. However, and I don't know for sure because I haven't researched it, I haven't looked into it. And I'm reluctant to say, you know, make statements until I've done that. However, theoretically and conceptually, I assume there's widespread institutional racism. It may not be intentional. It may not be deliberate. It may be unbiased. But everywhere I look, I see, particularly in the Western world. So there was one of my students who was doing work on volunteers in Africa, and she found institutional racism everywhere. Actually, Leona Vaughan, she would be the one who would be able to answer this question. She's doing research in Africa. She's looking at the ways in which young girls and women can be protected from men, because men are often predators. So I don't know for sure, but I would say it's probably racist, probably certainly racist, but I'd have to look into it. And I'm sure there are many people who are studying these issues who, you know, who have a lot more information than me.
Lovely, thanks. I've got some questions coming through from the audience. Question from Odin, if I'm saying that right. Can we trace the disproportionate suffering of Black people with COVID to the historic racism in these medical institutions?
The answer is yes, we can. The answer is most people who are in positions of power in England, they don't want to trace that. They don't want to look at that. They don't want to examine that. And their knee-jerk reaction is what I call to point the finger. So either they ignore it and say, look, this doesn't happen. It's not something, it's not important. Or they point the finger and say, look, we're not racist. It's the Americans that are racist. We're not racist. It's the South Africans. But clearly, if you look at the systematic discrimination against Black people in Britain, that's been documented year after year in report after report, including reports by the government. It shows substantial, extensive, deliberate racial discrimination. And because of that discrimination, Black people who are qualified are far less likely to get access to the best colleges, to the best graduate degrees and postgraduate degrees, far less likely to get access to the best jobs. And therefore, we are economically disadvantaged, even when we're overqualified. Now, you may have seen the story recently, a couple of weeks ago, of a Black woman who's a barrister in London, and she was stopped 3 times in a day. She's wearing her robes and the wig, and they thought she was the plaintiff. So this is widespread. And when people say, no, this is an individual issue, I say, wait a minute. If it's happening every day in all these cities over, it's no longer an individual issue. Institutional discrimination, it's not about the Ku Klux Klan with crosses. It's partly that. But institutional discrimination occurs when widespread practices, widespread stereotypes, widespread caricatures in different institutions make Black people's lives more difficult and allow us to get less access to resources. So in response to Ogun's question, if it's the Ogun I think it is, it's good to hear from you. If it's not, it's good to have the question. I say, yeah, we can trace it.
Thanks. And I'm just getting some comments through from people who work in the centre. So I'm just going to, in the school. So I'm just going to share those with you.
Sure. From
Rachel, as someone working in global health, I totally agree that institutional racism is absolutely prevalent. Stephen, you will be pleased to hear that there's lots of Black voices from Africa and everywhere making this case. And somebody says, so whilst individuals may not be, as you say, intensely racist, we do need to decolonize our own minds and our own thinking. So their comments coming through from people at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. So
I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear there are Black voices. And of course, I'm not saying, remember, I'm here to build, not destroy. And for me, building means having multiple voices from Black women and men, from non-Blacks, from whites, from different ethnicities, so that we can get a more inclusive, more comprehensive analysis. All I would say is I hope that the Black voices are not only being listened to, but that action is following. And I welcome that. I'm glad to hear from Rachel. I've never met her, that this is happening. And, you know, I encourage you.
Okay, so yeah, to just bring things a bit up to date and talk a little bit more about COVID. You mentioned Leona Vaughan, and in preparation, I read an excellent briefing authored by Leona and Angela Abasi. And basically, what they're outlining is that in terms of the disproportionate effects on Black communities, when you take in social differences, poverty, housing, types of jobs, there is still a disproportionate impact, which suggests actually direct racism, not just structural, long-term structural inequality,
Sure.
but racism is at the core of their experience. And I've read some reports from America that are saying that as well. How do we overcome that, do you think, if the health service is intrinsically racist? Do you agree it is? How do we overcome it?
Yeah, I agree it's intrinsically racist. It depends on your definition of racism. And I reject the definition of explicit racist intention, espoused by individuals. I think it's about the way the system is organized, the way the practices are organized. Look, when Pratasha Torkington and her colleagues wrote that book, Our Untold Stories, they described all the obstruction or the bureaucracy and outright racism. It's just the way it's like, oh, we'd love to help, but we can't do it. It's always, well, not always, but a lot of it is put that way. Okay. So what do people do? There's one thing I want to mention. There's a book by Herman Ousley, Usha Prashar, and Danny Silverstein called The System. That came out in the early 80s. It defined institutional racism. It described institutional racism, and it described all the ways in which it unfolds. What do we do? Well, what Ousley and the others said is you interrogate the system. You look at the practices. You have procedures and policies that examine who is appointed, who receives research funds, who receives certain jobs. And that's what they should do. And I understand they don't want to do it. And we have to push them. People who are concerned, who are honest, who are decent, we should work together to build rather than destroy. And I'd say one other thing. Look, I don't have all the solutions right here in front of me, but I will say this. We already know what to do. We know what to do. Black people, Black organizations, non-Black people too. We know what to do, and we've known for decades and for generations. So the issue is not so much what to do. The issue is how do we persuade them? The people with power, the people with appointments. And some of it will involve, for example, working with people in power. I know that I saw a presentation with the mayor of the city, Joe Anderson, at one of the WoW events, and he said he's committed. But also we have to work with people who are not in positions of power to push and to make pressure. Okay, let me give you one other example. Okay, when I did my master's degree in England in 1981, I think there were only 3 or 4 books on the history of Black people in England. Because in the 1980s and the 70s, if you asked about race issues in England, everybody white said, oh no, there's no race issues here. It's all South Africa. It's all Rhodesia. It's all and Black people in England, we wanted to learn about African Americans, but we also wanted to know about Black people in England. So there were only 3 or 4 books there. The most popular was Peter Fryer, but there was also some books by Folarin Shylon. Folarin Shylon wrote several books. Okay, now there are maybe a couple of 100 books, maybe not that many, but a massive amount, certainly a couple of 100 articles. And when I talk to professors in British universities, they say, well, we're doing all of this. We worked it out. We're sorry we did. And I'm saying, wait a minute. No, you didn't. You only made those changes because Black people mobilized. You only made those changes because Black people and our supporters wouldn't leave you alone. Let me give you another example. I was a guest curator at the Atlantic Slave Trade Gallery in the early 90s. And when that gallery opened, their intention was to have one curator. And Black people from around the city said, we're not going to allow it. We've tried to get a Black museum. You wouldn't give us money. You wouldn't. And we demand more. And over a period of time, we appointed several Black curators. We had several, and we pressured and persuaded in order to build, not destroy the museum, the gallery rather. And that gallery became a museum. And I know that people, including myself, work with Richard Benjamin. Now, some of my friends said, I've got no time to work with a museum. Police violence, unemployment, all of this, these were mainly men. And at all the meetings, it was mainly Black women. And I was like, well, what's going on? And they said, look, these museums are destroying our children's minds. They won't change. They go to school, they hear all this nonsense about Tarzan and Africans with bones in their noses. And Black women, when that gallery started, said, we don't want to see any naked Black women. We're fed up of it. We don't care if, so again, it comes from, there's always people inside, but my view is that it mainly comes from pressure from outside, targeting people with power and targeting others. Yeah, and that's what I'd like to see.
I absolutely agree. And I think we really need to keep up the pressure and the momentum of those protests that were so inspirational across the summer and translate it into action, really.
Sure.
We're not giving anything on a plate, are we? We have to keep up that pressure.
No, they're not calling us and saying we want to give you money, and there are people inside the institutions. There's a lot of different layers. There are some people inside, the British government and some other people have said, look, we're not going to decolonize the curriculum. A couple of days ago, there was a Black woman who's a conservative politician, and she said, look, this is illegal. I mean, they're not looking at any of the substance. They're taking the phrase, they're mobilizing their base. Okay, there are people like that inside universities, but there are also a lot of people who say, look, we want to do something. We want to work on these issues, but we don't have resources. We don't have these issues. And I was talking to Gloria Hyatt, and she was at an event around education. And she said, look, teachers are overwhelmed. They're under-resourced. They want to, so we have to look at some of the practicalities. But my view is this: we build rather than destroy. And we set our goals so that we're better off in a month than we are today. We're better off in a year than we are today. And we build up in that way.
Thanks, Stephen. Gloria Hyde's actually watching as we speak.
Gloria.
Say hello to Gloria.
Gloria.
We're nearly at the end, but we've got you. You're from America, obviously. The whole
Madeline. I'm not from America. I'm from Liverpool. I'm in America.
Yeah, apologies, but that's where you are right now. And obviously the election is dominating the news, probably almost as much as yours. And just to tie it into the health topic that we're talking about, Trump has really been kind of promoting eugenic theories, really. You can't call them anything else. The whole thing about genes, the whole thing about racehorses, and it looks like it is kind of getting some, popular support. If you were a betting man, Stephen, and I don't know if you are, what would you say is going to be the outcome of this election?
I'm going to give it a go, but I should tell you something about my limitations. Number one, I'm not a betting man. Number two, my brother said to me, Stephen, you're the only Jamaican I know who doesn't smoke weed, and you've never smoked weed. And I said, yeah, not all Jamaicans smoke weed. And number three, I'm not a drinking man. However, where would I put? Look, here's what I would say. Whenever people consider the US, my advice is, number one, recognize that it's massive and it's uneven. More than 330 million people across 50 states. So what's happening in Florida, Mississippi, North Carolina is very different from what's happening in Washington State or California. So that's the first point. The second point I would make is the US, Britain is racially segregated, but the US is far more racially segregated. There are many places where Black people and white people do not interact whatsoever physically or in social spaces. Okay, so it makes it very difficult and very uneven. Okay, so having said that, here's what I'd say. Black people are mobilizing. The Black Lives Matter movement is mobilizing. When Trump first got in, Black Lives Matter was far more critical of the Democrats. They are critical now, but it seems to be there's more dialogue and more discussion. The surveys that I've read recently say that Trump is behind and Biden will win. However, they said that before when he was fighting against Hillary Clinton. So I'm glad I'm not a betting man, because I don't know that I could do it. In California, we have a progressive governor, Newsom. He's getting some criticism recently, but we have a progressive governor. We have policies and practices that are relatively progressive, even though they're being criticized. Some people are trying to get affirmative action back in. So it's very uneven. You know, I don't know that I can say anything more than that. Yeah, I don't know that I can or I should. I don't like to mention his name, you know.
Right. Okay.
I understand he's important, but I don't have to mention his name. It's not going to make so.
Okay.
But the message I want to get to people in Liverpool is Black people are mobilizing across the whole country. Black women, including queer women and trans women, are often at the front of this mobilization in different communities, in universities, in colleges. Okay. And there are also many multiracial alliances. So I don't like to make these blanket statements about white people. The population is stratified. It's always been stratified. And we always need to look at, in my opinion, you know, class and gender and immigration. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. So we are at the end of our conversation, and yeah, fingers crossed that we get the outcome that we both want. We won't mention his name, but the outcome that we all want, I am sure everybody watching too, come that election. But I think it's fair to say the fight for racial equality will still continue regardless of the outcome, both in the States and here at home. But it does feel like we are at a watershed moment, and I'm quite optimistic anyway.
Good.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Stephen, and I look forward to continuing our conversations. We've been chatting on Zoom, haven't we? And thanks to Gloria, actually, for hooking us up, because I've really enjoyed those conversations.
Me too.
And you said to me, I've got this picture out in Canada. You've got a picture of your mum and dad, and you look at it, and every day you're grateful of the fact that they were education. And I really think you should speak to young people, because the stuff that I've been reading around this topic is so heavily academic, and you have presented it so accessibly. And you are.
I think it was accessible. Did you think it was accessible? I thought it was
totally accessible, totally. But you know, I think you are, you know, inspirational, and I hope you can get a young audience and inspire them in some way. Lovely. We will continue our chats, and hopefully we'll meet face to face in the not too distant future.
I hope so too. Can I say two quick things? Yes, I do want to target a younger audience. I need to speak with younger people to tell me the best way to do that, because I know they don't want to read long things. I'm writing a series of short articles, just a few hundred words, that I mentioned to you, and I'll follow up with that. There's one other thing I want to say that's very important. You mentioned Sonia Bassi. In my presentation today, I talked about Black voices. But I also am doing a lot of work on what I call Black visions. And Black visions are art, poetry, music, theatre, dance. And Black visions are just as important as Black voices. And I believe there are far more Black visions in the imperial period and now by Black women and men that we also need to look at. And I've been writing on some of those things. I'm not, you know, specialized on that. But I do want to mention that this work is just as important, and perhaps more important, because when you're inside universities, they want to get you in a straitjacket and turn you into what I call academic gobbledygook and make it inscrutable and incomprehensive. Not all of them, I know. So thanks a lot, Madeline. I'll be in touch. And thanks for the opportunity for doing this. Thanks to Kieran and the team for making it all easy and for taking care of the technology. I wish you success for the end of the month, and I'll be in contact.
Lovely, lovely. Thanks, Stephen. Speak soon. Okay, so Stephen's thanked the team. I'll echo that, and all that remains for me to do is remind you that if you like the work that we do, there's a donate link that's going to come up at the end of Facebook. There's also our feedback form, and your feedback is hugely important to us. I can see some fantastic feedback in the comment section, but if you could fill in that form, we'd be very grateful. And just to switch you over to our writers block, our dedicated space, online space for new writers. Tomorrow we have Yatasha Womack, who's coming to the end of her 3-week residency. She's an Afrofuturist writer and broadcaster from Chicago, and tomorrow is her she's got her last event with us tomorrow, where she will be presenting her creative response to being on the block, new work, and new work from those people who've been working with her for the last 3 weeks. So that's at 5 o'clock tomorrow, again on Facebook, and it would be great to see you there. And I hope you've all enjoyed this incredible talk tonight, and thank you all for coming. I'm Madeline Hennigan, and I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Bye-bye.